This is something that sucks in oxygen from the surrounding air to generate a high-temperature explosion that can be as destructive as some nuclear bombs. They're called vacuum bombs, and the Ukrainian ambassador to the United States says Russia is using them in their invasion of his country. Verified footage has also emerged of Russia using cluster bombs, which are banned by the international community in some urban areas. All lethal weapons by their nature obviously kill, but do these cross some sort of invisible and sometimes visible ethical line? Joining me, Peter Felsted, the defence consultant and former editor of Jane's Defence Weekly. Thanks for your time. Shall we start with these vacuum bombs, how they work and what they're attempting to achieve?
Well, they're typically also known as thermobaric weapons, and they are a two-stage munition. So what actually happens is that the first detonation will actually put into the air a cloud of basically fuel, ignitable fuel, and then the second detonation will ignite that fuel cloud. Now, what it does is it creates a very large pressure wave that is much longer than the average conventional high explosive warhead. And what this can do is it can just send shock waves through the target, which could be a bunker. They've been used by the coalition against Al-Qaeda in the mountain caves. That would be a typical use. You wouldn't expect to see them used against apartment blocks where there are civilians, and that almost, it just contravenes international humanitarian law.
There's obviously a fine legal point behind that distinction between how you're killed by a vacuum bomb, Peter, and, say, another type of munition. I'm always slightly puzzled by it, I have to say, whether you're killed in a firestorm, whether you're killed by a shockwave, whether you're killed by a cluster bomb. You die writhing in agony if you're unlucky. You die quickly if you're lucky. I mean, that's the brute logic of this thing.
Well, there are legitimate uses for these weapons. For example, thermobaric warheads can be used to clear a path through a minefield, for example, because the pressure wave will actually detonate the mines, clear a lane through the minefield. It's really about whether civilians are being targeted as opposed to the weapon itself, although obviously many countries have signed up against the use of cluster munitions, for example, and we can see that the Russians are using those. So it's the fact that not only are they being indiscriminate, I don't think they're even thinking about civilian casualties. I don't think they care.
No, I think you're probably right. And I mean, the point about the cluster munitions is, they're fantastic, if that's the right word, at clearing a given area that's full of soldiers with thin-skinned vehicles, light-skinned vehicles. But they're also, very good at killing people when they land on a shopping mall, as happened, a government building, or indeed a housing development. In terms of, I'm just curious about the language here. People have been talking a lot about defensive weapons. We've supplied these anti-tank weapons to the Ukrainians, and we've called them defensive weapons. If you're sitting, Peter, inside a Russian armoured personnel carrier or a main battle tank, and one of those things comes through the armour, they don't feel very defensive, do they?
Well, there's a difference between these kind of tactical anti-armour and indeed anti-aircraft weapons. So they're small man-portable systems. They've got a relatively short range, and they're very much for defending a position. Whereas what we're seeing from the Russians now, and then the campaign is really entering a much bloodier phase, we have to admit that, and deliberately so on the part of the Russians. They're now using multiple rocket launchers that have ranges of 70 kilometers and above. And I think they're just going to be prepared to stand off the major cities within Ukraine and just pulverize them. And we've seen them do that before in Chechnya, for example.
Well, you took the words, Peter, you took the words out of my mouth. I just keep thinking about Grozny in Chechnya, where at the end they were just rearranging the rubble, weren't they?
Yeah, the footage that you've just showed there, that could well have been an Iskander tactical ballistic missile which is exactly the kind of weapon that was used to flatten Grozny.